Hi, everyone, and welcome to the free Assange online vigil series. My name is Taylor Hudak, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Andrew Smith, Christy Doff, and Steve Poikinen. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2020, and today is day 307 of Julian's arrest and his imprisonment. And today is day 3,354 of his unlawful and arbitrary detention. As for Chelsea Manning, today marks day 336 days that she has been imprisoned, and she is now up to $227,000 in fines. Remember, 2 weeks from today, the hearing will have already begun, and we will be covering that in London and in DC. And we want to thank everybody who helped contribute to our GoFundMe to make this happen. Before we move on to some news regarding Julian Assange and keeping you all updated, we are joined by a very special guest, Dak Rouleau. Dak Rouleau is an independent journalist from New Hampshire, and you could find his work at overwritten.org. Dak Rouleau is well known for his coverage on the candidates, specifically asking all of the candidates for their stance on Julian Assange, and he has worked heavily with me on an article that I had published and is a main contributor to that piece. Dak has definitely been someone who has set the standard when it comes to questioning the candidates. So he and our co-host Christy were both just recently in Iowa, and I'm going to let them take over from here and explain exactly what happened, because I'm sure you did see that there was an incident in Iowa during the caucus. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody is a little tired of hearing about Iowa, but we did have some people in the chat who really did want to hear our perspective and what was going on. We don't have very good news on as far as the results, still sort of pending, sort of finalized. I'm not really sure what is happening as far as that goes, but we did have an interesting time going to the caucus. The Iowa caucus is known for being a little disorganized, a little rowdy, and at times it seems like there's been a lot of stories out of Iowa over the years of people getting really intensely in each other's faces over these candidates, because the caucus allows people to vote multiple times. And a candidate has to have 15% viability in a precinct. And so when a candidate does achieve that viability, they get to then speak to the non-viable candidate voters and try to persuade them over, which sometimes is not, doesn't go over nicely. Our precinct, while it was located very shortly before the actual caucus day, luckily we found out in time. It was fairly organized, and I would say overall the attitude of people was pretty even keeled, at least at the beginning. It was, I would say, dominantly a Warren crowd and a Pete crowd at this precinct. Bernie's supporters were there very actively as well. Biden did not do so well in the precinct. I was involved actually caucusing while Dak got to walk around and observe, and he can pick up and tell you a little bit of what he saw and the interactions that he had with people.
Yeah, so I was hoping to see how people would interact with each other during the caucusing, how they were going to convince one another to vote for the candidate of their preference. And unfortunately, I ended up crossing paths with, I never did learn the gentleman's name. He claimed he worked for some division of the Iowan government, either Fish and Game or the Wildlife Reserve, something like that. But I ended up calling him the Bull Goose after what occurred on the caucus floor. We struck up a friendly conversation talking about the differences between Iowa and New Hampshire. And then we got on the subject of what I was going to do when I returned to New Hampshire. And I said I was going to vote for Tulsi Gabbard. He immediately asked me why I was, quote, voting for Putin, because like many of American adults, he has been watching way too much TV and has become convinced that Tulsi Gabbard is being paid rubles in order to stir up trouble here at home. When I explained to him that the reason I was voting for Tulsi Gabbard was because of her support for Julian Assange, he then accused me of being not only a paid emissary of the Russian government, but also a terrorist. We got into a discussion about that, about how Julian Assange is not a terrorist, but most of the people running for the nomination of the Democratic Party have actually committed terroristic war crimes, or at the very least have indicated that they're more than willing to do so once they take office. He ended up leaving to go back to the other side of the room, and then when he returned with a black magic marker in his hands, he proceeded to try to drag that over my hands to, quote, give me another Russian tattoo. I'm not sure which of the tattoos on my arm he thought was in Russian. He might have thought that this German tattoo was in Russian, or he might have thought that this French tattoo was in Russian. But I think what he actually thought was that this was in Russian. I know you probably can't see it very well. This is actually English that is upside down. So he probably thought that the English language was Russian from his perspective. And when he tried to drag that on my hands, I snapped the marker literally in half out of his hands. And that was when the ushers had to separate us. And he spent most of the rest of the night staring at me and making sexual gestures at me. And that's the kind of behavior that the Democratic Party encourages, and that was by far the most brutal response I've received for supporting Julian Assange out there in the real world.
Yeah, throughout my time caucusing, we and one other person caucused for Tulsi, and obviously with just two people, we were not a viable choice. So I started to try to court the other candidates' crews. I had an Assange shirt on, and so I went up to them, specifically the Bernie group, because they were a pretty solid group that was looking to be a viable candidate. And I asked them if they would encourage Bernie to stand up and say Julian Assange's name, and stand up for him and make a statement that I would consider moving over to Bernie's side. I got a lot of stares and a lot of shrugs and yeah, sure. So I ended up going over to Yang's side initially for the very official first round. After it looked like Tulsi was not going to be able to stand to the other viable candidates. So yeah, it was a little frustrating. We did talk to the Amy Klobuchar people. We talked to the Andrew Yang people. We talked to Warren people about Julian Assange. I would say probably the Yang, and there were a few Bernie people that actually the precinct captain for Bernie was very receptive to hearing what I had to say about Julian Assange. The Warren people were not. They really didn't have a response for us. And the Pete people really didn't either. At least I did not get any a good response from them. So it was interesting because as they are going through these rounds, a lot of the precinct captains go around to the undecided voters and ask them, what's your issue? Like, why did you like this candidate? What can I tell you about my candidate? So it was an interesting experience talking about Julian Assange and seeing how many people, the public that live in my neighborhood, in my area, don't know enough about Julian Assange. So yeah, ultimately, I believe Pete won my precinct. So, and of course, as we know, the vote between Pete and Bernie is Bernie won the popular vote, but Pete got the most delegates. And yeah, it was a very interesting experience, and especially that evening, as we expected to be able to talk that evening and record something about the results, nothing was coming in. And we started seeing reports about the app not working and the long phone waits for the precincts to be calling into. Yeah, it was, and as like Dak wrote up about, he was interviewed by RT and wrote his own experience on his blog. We've had a lot of people, of course, the Bernie supporters coming back to us saying that he did support Julian Assange. As I was live tweeting through the night, I had a lot of people tweeting at me that Bernie does support Julian Assange. And as we'll get into later into the show, we actually, Primo Nutmeg actually did an interview with somebody from the campaign, and they have not made an official statement. No. So there's a lot of misinformation out there on whether Bernie does or doesn't support Julian. And that was kind of interesting to see all those Bernie people not know who Julian Assange was. It was very disappointing, actually.
I don't.
That happened to Andrew and I as well. So Dak, why don't you go ahead also and explain further your experience, and then also what you wrote about, and maybe your contact with RT, and if you felt that it was perhaps your support for Julian Assange that may have led you to being targeted.
Well, it definitely was. Helen Biniski, you can follow her on Twitter at Velocirapture23, I believe. She was the one who wrote the article for RT describing what had happened, and what it showed was the person, the bull goose who came and grabbed me. I didn't really consider it assault, but what he was doing was, this is a person who has obviously been spending way too much time online and has been fed the Russiagate narrative for the last several years. And so he was in person with what he thought was an actual Russian terrorist here to wreak havoc at the Iowa caucuses. And so when he's face to face with that kind of foreign menace that he's been reading about in his political fantasy blogs for the last several years, he thinks that he finally has an opportunity to save the day and to defend the Democratic Party, and that's his way of doing it. He just obviously doesn't want to go all the way and actually get himself into trouble with the law by actually assaulting somebody. Now, on the campaign trail, I had 3 unique experiences where people became aggressive about my stance on Assange, and I noticed that each time they became more and more aggressive. The first time was way back at a country fair months and months ago. Some people, progressive supposedly, told me that they would not vote for Tulsi Gabbard if she was serious about dropping the charges against Assange. They said that they agreed with her on every other point, but if it came down to defending Assange, they would switch their vote to Donald Trump, which I thought was ideologically incoherent. And then a few months later, there was a Trump supporter who took an interest in Tulsi Gabbard, and he stood by the view that Julian Assange is some kind of international criminal and he deserves whatever he gets. Now, he and I got into a little bit of a verbal argument, but it never came to a physical point like it did in Iowa. And I think what we see is that these people who are buying into this Pentagon propaganda are becoming increasingly insecure as they get closer and closer to the dashing of their political dreams. They know that their candidates are not going to dethrone Donald Trump, and so they're looking to blame whoever they can. And like Julian Assange became the scapegoat in 2016, he's getting ready to become the scapegoat in 2020.
Right. So I think, do we want to touch on the latest interview with Primo Nutmeg? Because I do have a few thoughts on this, and I know Christy had brought it up. I do want to address a few things with this. Of course, we have been vindicated, actually, with what we have said all along, was that Bernie Sanders has not commented and does not have a stance on Julian Assange. That was just proven to be true when Primo Nutmeg interviewed Brianna Gray. We learned that she is not aware of his stance on Julian Assange, and it is not a priority, nor is it on their campaign platform. I find it hard to believe that she is unaware of his stance. I bet that she does know his stance. However, at the same time, I think when I watched that video and I watched her answer that question, I sensed a lot of frustration. I sensed somebody who did have a clear response to this question and wanted to say something, but could not for some reason. In the campaign, for some reason, they do not want to address this issue. I think they should. I think it's wrong. I think they need to talk about this. And hopefully with more journalists asking him this question and asking people involved in his campaign this question, they will finally feel compelled that they do owe the American people an answer. I also want to bring up another point, which I posted about on Twitter, and that was, this is much bigger than just Bernie Sanders, guys. This is a much bigger issue. The fact that a U.S. presidential candidate, being Bernie Sanders, is fearful to actually comment on the most consequential press case of modern history. The fact that he is afraid to comment on that is indicative that there is a lot of problems that we need to address, and that this is a systemic issue. It's not just Bernie Sanders. This is bigger than Bernie Sanders. But again, like I've said before, please, if you support him, you can still support him and be critical of his inability to address this issue.
If the stance is no stance, that's an admission from the top all the way down that we refuse to talk about this. Now, there's an element that says, well, he's playing 87-dimensional chess, and of course he can't say anything right now, because then maybe, you know, the exact people that aren't going to vote for him would go after him over it. But if your strategy is to win over independents, and your strategy is to court disaffected conservatives, and your strategy is to get the people who don't vote, you need to take a stand on the issues that matter to us.
But
Right.
there's a problem with that, though, which is now that the New Hampshire primary is over and all of the candidates have closed up shop here in the Granite State, my work going after them and asking them about Assange comes to an end. And what we see is the great failure of my work, which is that it didn't seem to move the needle on any of these candidates, with the possible exception of Andrew Yang. It's possible that my video on Yang may have hurt his candidacy somewhat, but I don't see any evidence that it had any kind of palpable effect. So Bernie is looking at the numbers here, and he sees that failing to take a stance on Julian Assange is not going to have any kind of tangible impact upon his polling. And he is also, he doesn't see any reason to come out in Assange's defense if it's not going to affect his political viability.
Yeah, and for anybody who hasn't been watching our vigil for the last few months, we premiered Dak's video asking Bernie back at beginning of October, and that just sort of started this debate with fans on whether he actually does stand up for Julian Assange. And so he's had months now to make a statement. And as Taylor talked about, this interview with Brianna Gray really does show that the campaign has not taken this seriously. The campaign has not formulated a statement, and maybe they are frustrated that they are getting pressured by Julian Assange's movement in order to say something. And it is a bigger problem that these candidates either are now claiming ignorance, that they don't know enough about Julian Assange to make a statement, or are just flat out saying no. And since the last time Dak has been on the vigil, he has approached a few more candidates. I don't know if you want to talk about anyone in particular that you've asked that you found a little bit interesting in their response about Julian Assange, Dak.
Well, I think almost everybody that I've asked since then has dropped out of the race, because Cory Booker's campaign went up in smoke. And then you asked Deval Patrick, and he just gave up the ghost earlier today. And then I asked Bill Weld, and he didn't have anything to say on it. Bill Weld said that Edward Snowden is a pardon right away, but he hasn't made up his mind yet on Julian Assange, which that's a separate issue. What I think is we should talk about probably is I had an interview with Mike Gravel, which went on for about an hour, close to that. Mike Gravel said that Bernie Sanders cannot come out in defense of Julian Assange right now because the corporate media would devour him if he were to do so. Now, obviously, we've heard that argument before, but Mike Gravel said that if we look at the people with whom Bernie Sanders associates professionally, we would be able to infer that his Department of Justice would be comprised of individuals who would be more than willing to drop the charges against Assange. And I think that Mike Gravel is obviously a lot smarter than I am, and he's been following these issues for most of his adult life. And so I think that we should take what he says seriously. And so anybody who does support Assange, I don't mind those people going out and voting for Bernie Sanders, seeing him as a viable ideological alternative to Trump. But at the same time, Bernie Sanders has not been consistent in his attitude on a lot of these issues. Like, for example, at a Democratic debate, he voluntarily criticizes Israel when there was no reason for him to do so. And that is going to be a lot more disconcerting to the military-industrial complex than any kind of token support for Julian Assange. So what I would say about Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign is that if he is serious about defending Julian Assange, his campaign obviously did not have any kind of strategy to prepare for the criticism he was going to receive from people who do follow these issues and who do want serious answers.
Jack, can you maybe, throughout your time questioning the candidates, can you kind of break down for us like the responses that seem to be very common For example, people claiming that they're unaware of the issue or that they don't want to speak about that case in particular. Can you break this down for us, please?
Well, the people who said I didn't get answers from people that they hadn't heard of the issue until the very end of it, when I got the same answer from Cory Booker, Deval Patrick, and I actually asked Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire if he would be willing to reach out to the Trump administration and advise him to drop the charges. What I believe occurred, and what you folks here have suggested, is that the presidential candidates eventually, Tom Steyer also, he also said that he didn't know enough about the issue to comment. I believe that at some point they realized that there was some guy going around New Hampshire asking the presidential candidates where they stood on Julian Assange, and so somebody had advised them that the safest answer would be to say that you're not on the issue to comment, but you will look into it and you are generally in support of the First Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if they were being sincere and they really had never heard of Julian, or they were ignorant of Julian Assange, then that says a lot about their intellectual integrity and their intellectual conscience. Because if you are unaware and uninformed about a case that has been going on for 10 years now, a federal case that has attracted international attention, then I cannot take you seriously as a political commentator. And furthermore, let me just point this out. I can't speak to Deval Patrick, but Cory Booker is a close friend of Hillary Clinton's. Cory Booker was on Hillary Clinton's short list for vice president in 2016. I believe he knows everything about Julian Assange, and he is more than conversant with his persecution. Secondly, Tom Steyer, it turns out, is a close friend of John Podesta, who was, of course, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2016. WikiLeaks actually released, as part of their DNC purge in 2016, they showed that Tom Steyer and John Podesta were exchanging recipes for spaghetti sauce. So they were obviously on pretty friendly terms. So again, I can't believe that Tom Steyer doesn't know anything about Assange's case. I think that these people are quite familiar with the issue, and they just don't want to comment on it because they believe it would be political suicide. So we basically have hideous answers no matter which way you look at it.
Right. And do we want to play some of Dak's videos right now, or do we want to, or do we want to hold off? You could find all of this footage on Dak's YouTube channel at Dak. You could follow him on Twitter at Dak Rouleau. Your YouTube channel is Dak Rouleau as well, I believe. And then also, Dak, can you let everybody know quickly before we introduce our next guest, can you let everybody know where they can find you on social media, on all platforms, and then also where they can access your work?
Well, like you said, they can find me at Dak Rouleau on Twitter. My YouTube channel is Dak Rouleau. I'm at overwritten.org, and that's where we have all the chronicles of the presidential candidates archived. Yeah, so the work is basically done. All the candidates have closed up shop and left New Hampshire. So unless Michael Bloomberg becomes the Democratic Party nominee and returns to New Hampshire, it's unlikely that I'll be talking to any of them again in the future. But if the opportunity arises to put a public figure on the spot about the Assange case, I certainly will. Now, before I go, since my time is coming to an end, it would seem, I just wanted to say that one of your co-hosts, Christy Doff, and I are going to be launching our own YouTube show shortly. It's going to be called The Overwritten Report. Every week, we're going to be covering issues, not just the Assange case, but also a lot of issues with mass media propaganda, seeing how the public is being misled and manipulated in order to fit them into the box that will be to the establishment's benefit. And we're going to be launching that starting next week, date and time to be determined, but that's something that we can look forward to. That'll be streamed on my YouTube channel at Dak Rouleau. And we will see you all again.
All right, Dak, thank you so much. Very exciting news. I'm sure Christy will let us know more about that near the end of the show. Very exciting. Congratulations to you guys. So now I want to introduce our next guest, friend of the vigil, Jason Burmas. All of us have appeared on his show. Big supporter of Julian Assange, big advocate for free speech and a free press. Jason, how are you?
Very good. And I just want to say that Dak just continues to impress. I was following his stuff over the last week or so, and his post with the angry gentleman that thinks that Tulsi Gabbard is an agent of Poot Poot. And I just want to say, keep it up, man, because we have to hold these people's feet to the fire. And even if those videos are getting a dozen views or only a few hundred views, eventually they're going to break through. Sometimes it takes time. And just because it's not big now doesn't mean that we can't force someone like Bernie Sanders, who seems to be the inevitable front runner, to make a statement on Assange.
Absolutely. So I know that we now want to switch gears here, and we want to touch on an article, an AI article, or about AI specifically in the UK government. I'm going to hand this over to Andrew, who has really been on these sorts of issues.
Yeah, thank you very much. So recently, over the weekend, we covered the situation surrounding what the UK is doing in regards to facial recognition, and particularly the UK Metropolitan Police. And then this right here, it's just a brief snippet that kind of goes into what's actually been happening, because the UK government's rolled out a lot of artificial intelligence programs without public knowledge. And this kind of just drives into the total lack of transparency that the UK government has in relation to disclosing the use of AI against its citizens. And in particular, how it's just a gross violation of human rights, of privacy, literally a violation of almost every civil liberty you can imagine, to the point that these systems have the ability to identify someone as they're just walking down the road and then send them a ticket, and then 60% of the time, to 80 or even 90% of the time in some cases, those recognition systems are completely wrong. So I think as these dystopian systems get rolled out, it's really important to call them out as it's happening. And a lot of times at this point in history, it's in real time as we're seeing these AI programs being deployed against the public.
And facial recognition goes even far beyond right now what's in real time. Obviously, this harkens to the social credit score in China, Andrew. But there was a story this week where offline photos are also available to a lot of these facial recognition programs that were once put up and kind of scraped from the internet, but available in these large archives, letting you know that this track trace database system has been basically built upon for some time and is now being initiated.
Yeah, and it's all by intimate design here too. We saw just on, I believe it was January 24th, the UK launched their facial recognition system. That's literally 1 month ahead of schedule before Julian Assange gets put on trial, when there's tons of protesters gathering and getting in the streets for that event. So all of this is coordinated to get people into that track trace database society. So eventually, when the time comes, they can just kick the doors in and drag us out of our own homes.
I mean, you look at Wuhan, China, and the thing that scares me the most is that is actually happening, and that they have actually quarantined over 50 million people. And there's a YouTube channel up there called Last Messages that's basically just posting a lot of this, cell phone footage. It's terrifying. Depending on what you believe the severity of this virus is, to me, the scariest thing is that you have ghost cities that once housed 24 million people just several weeks ago, that you have videos of authoritative figures stomping indoors and tearing people out of their homes, out of their cars, using excessive force. And I think this is why it's so important that we maintain some semblance of free speech in this country, because they can't share the information on a mass level. These are just the leaks we're seeing. If we ever get to that point, who's to say that doesn't come here and to the Western world?
Well, and this is stuff out of like a 20-year-old James Rollins book. This is from what it looks like, a 100% manufactured virus. It looks like it was perhaps intentionally released. There's all kinds of things, Jason, that should raise a bunch of red flags about this. First of all, the Chinese government falsely claiming where it originated from. And that was something that they came out with that it seemed like they were prepared to answer. No, every time you learn a little bit more about it, it opens up a giant bag of questions.
I just know authoritarianism when I see it, and scary authoritarianism. And when, again, you can be on the streets and be ripped out of your car with what seems like almost lethal force because they decided that you had a virus or you had a symptom, or You were filming something you weren't supposed to. I watched a video not only of someone, I mean, these videos are incredible, have their cell phone ripped out of their hands and then them thrown in jail. But earlier, yesterday, I watched video of, I wasn't sure what was going on. You saw the police surrounding somebody who was welding doors shut to, I don't know, a skyscraper at least 15, 20 stories high. I'm like, what's going on here? 20 minutes later, the thing is up in flames. Why are you welding the door shut? Who is in there? I mean, this is a frightening reality. And there are 1.1 billion people there, almost, 3 to 4 times the population here. And they're successfully suppressing information about how that population is actually being treated. And it should frighten everybody. It should frighten everybody that this new national counterintelligence report is out there where if you're a public disclosure organization, or you're a hacktivist, or a term I've never heard in my life, a leaktivist. So now if you're a whistleblower and you've leaked something, or you're an organization like WikiLeaks that publishes this stuff, you're on par with ISIS, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda, and bad actors like Cuba and North Korea. It's unbelievable.
Could you pull that article, or not even the article, but the actual document itself up? Because you did a great video on it earlier, so I want to point people back to that one. But just to talk about it a little bit, because as you were reading through this earlier, it was really, really dramatic to me, because it literally sounds exactly like what we're trying to do and the change we're trying to bring through local organizing efforts, public awareness campaigns, organizing protests.
Well, again, if you look at this, right, this part is not even part of the report. This is the cover letter that is signed off on by who? The President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. And in this, it talks about hackers and public disclosure organizations, as I have highlighted. But what maybe is even scarier is that he runs the propaganda line that Russia could employ aggressive tactics to instigate and exacerbate tensions and instability in the U.S., including interfering with the security of our elections. And again, that's signed by the President of the United States, the guy that loved the WikiLeaks, couldn't get enough of the WikiLeaks. When you get to the first page of the actual report, let's go down one more. Here's the contents, but the first page, in the same sentence, they are equating, again, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Hezbollah, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda with hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure organizations. And now we're not talking about, things that are unconstitutional. They're talking about what? The interests of the United States, which to me is a wide variety of things, Andrew, and very, very subject to interpretation.
We actually had Patrick Kensington on week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And we actually went in really in depth talking about the actual wording and the use of the term national interest, because up until this point, they were using the term national security, which is broadly accepted by people, meaning we're not going to be attacked by X, Y, and Z organization. But in this last few months, we've seen a literal wording shift from national security to national interest, which if you look into it, literally just says what is in the financial interest of the United States. And when you boil it down and look at it in that direction, they're literally saying, what is the predetermined policy of the United States to ensure that our political elite can make the most money possible? And what that boils down to is fascism. That is the merger of corporate and political power to create a state in and of itself. And that's something that I feel like needs to be called out, because the word national interest literally just says the people who are here to take your money and spend it on themselves.
Killer, brother. I mean, you're absolutely right. And we've had that for some time. I mean, if you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you understand that these are the types of things that we've been employing over the decades. But now they're going full throttle. They have not only cut the throat of free speech, but they're preparing to bring it overseas for everybody to see and make a show trial like no other. And this is the next step. This is the plan, 2020 to 2022. cyber activists, hacktivists, leaktivists, public disclosure organizations. They are the new terrorists.
That's what Julian Assange's case is going to hinge around, as far as the State Department is concerned. That Julian Assange is a cyber terrorist. They're going to do everything they possibly can to get it away from, does a publisher have the right, as has been determined by Judge Kettle in the DNC lawsuit, a number of other cases, does a publisher have a right to print information the government doesn't like? Fuck yes, they do. But the State Department would rather, as you said, put on a show trial, which is, by the way, the biggest press freedom trial in our lifetimes. Probably anybody watching right now, your entire lifetime, this is the biggest press freedom trial. And we are not hearing enough about it. Slowly, there are journalists that are more mainstream talking about it, but it's a whisper in a storm. And we need the exact opposite of that to happen, Jason.
I couldn't agree more. I know that you guys got some other articles over here that you want to go over. But before we do that, I just want to tell my audience right now to go over to actionforassange.com and make sure you support these guys. And after this, over at Action for Assange, where they're going to be continuing the vigil, make sure you're subscribed. Does somebody want to tell my audience what you guys have planned for the extradition hearing now that you have you've raised the funds? Half of you are going to go to DC, the other half out to London and cover this. You know, what are the plans, guys?
I'll speak on behalf of what's happening in London. I'll be headed out there to cover this extradition hearing. I will be working with others in London. I'm actually leaving a week tomorrow. It's hard to believe, but I will. I will mainly be covering things that are taking place outside of the courtroom. I will not have access into the courtroom, but I will be in touch with those who do. And then I will just be doing, live tweets, updates, video footage to be posted somewhere on YouTube or a different streaming platform. Still making those last those final decisions exactly where that content will be, but I will be covering that on the ground from London. And then Christy and Andrew could speak to what's taking place here at home in DC.
Oh, I'll jump in here real quick because I had planned on going to London, and 4 months into my passport application, I finally got a hold of somebody at the State Department, and they had flagged my passport application.
No!
What happened?
No!
What
Let's
happened?
talk about that.
What happened was in 2001, I went to a widespread panic show, and I was standing underneath an awning in a rainstorm with a couple other people who were standing underneath an awning in a rainstorm. We had backpacks on, and there were 3 cops on bicycles that came up and hemmed us in. And by the time they were done running our pockets, I had about a half a dozen hits of ecstasy in my pocket that I did not have before those cops threw me up against the wall. I'm in Athens, Georgia, by the way. Flash forward 3 months. They kept us in this jail for 3 months before they would let anyone go to court. And then they had everyone plead no contest and kicked us out of the state of Georgia. I wasn't allowed in the state of Georgia for 15 years. I didn't miss it. But that was part of the condition. Now, 5 years ago, that had been expunged. And I brought this up to the State Department, and they said, well, it's something that you can, you can question it or challenge it, but for the time being, your passport's flagged.
Unreal, man. Well, good luck, because that's a shitty story.
Okay, I understand that there are probably oversights in the State Department, it being a giant bureaucracy, mostly full of self-serving careerists who would let something slip, by undetected. I mean, it's within the realm of possibility, but it feels a little intentional, given why we were traveling and what we're going to be covering.
Sounds good. Christy, you want to tell us what your plans are in DC?
Yeah, so we have actions planned Monday through Friday of the first week of the extradition hearing of Julian Assange. So Monday we will be marching from the White House to Trump Tower to the DOJ. Tuesday is our media day, and we will be announcing different media outlets that we will be peacefully protesting and letting them know that if they do not speak up for Julian Assange, that they might be next, as far as indictments coming along the way to other journalists for practicing journalism. On Wednesday, we are planning to be at the detention center where Chelsea Manning and Jeremy Hammond are being held. Thursday, we will be at Capitol Hill, and we've been reaching out to congressmen and women to ask them to also come out and stand up for Julian Assange, stand up for free speech, and stand up for free press. And then Friday, we are planning to go back to the White House and Trump Tower and DOJ. On Thursday and Friday, I do believe we are going to have the truck with the Assange and Chelsea Manning sign with us around town with us. So we're really excited about that. We are planning different actions, and we're going to be streaming with Taylor in London. I'm trying to go back and forth as the court hearing progresses, see what we can find out, do different interviews. And yeah, we've got a lot of content planned throughout the week.
Sounds awesome. I'm really hyped up. I hope you guys are going to be live streaming as much as possible as well.
Yes,
we will be.
I know DC, they will be able to. I'm not 100% sure if I will be able to from London. I think that we intend on doing so. And I'm going there a few days early before the hearing begins so I can test out all of my equipment and make sure that I can live stream. And then I'll also be going to Imperialism on Trial event Tuesday, which is going to be really interesting. I'll be live tweeting that. And yeah, so that's what we'll do. But I know for sure, DC, they can live stream. And if you are in the US and you can make it to DC, join us because it's really important to show support for Julian. And I'm sure that my co-host had encouraged everybody to join in on these efforts.
Absolutely. I'm looking for your GoFundMe on here. Here it is, the extradition hearing. Bam, perfect timing. So if my audience wants to help, you guys have raised $5,100. Every dollar goes to a good cause. And again, they're going overseas. They're going to DC. They're bringing light to this issue. It is so, 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 so important because, again, the predator class, the media, military, industrial complex, it moves forward. And most people are not paying attention. And there are not even whispers in the mainstream media right now about what's going on with Assange. Instead, we're being bombarded with Amy Klobuchar and Pete Bootlicker and the end of Grandma Oatmeal and Joey B's senility finally catching up to him. And yeah, that's great. But a lot of it's sensationalized and it's going to pass. And we knew that all of these establishment politicians couldn't come to power. Well, what's going to remain is the implications of not only what's happened to Assange, currently happening to Assange, but what could happen to him in the coming weeks.
Hey, Jason, actually, for your viewers, if you guys are in the New York area, in New York City, there's going to be an event held by the Courage Foundation at CUNY School of Law. I can't remember the exact what the meaning is behind that acronym, but if you go to Courage Foundation's Twitter account, you can find information about that event where they're going to have a panel of journalists and attorneys speak about the prosecution of Julian Assange. I went to the one in DC. I will be attending the one this Saturday at 2 p.m. at the law school in New York City. So do attend. It should be really interesting.
Excellent.
And I will be in DC too.
Well, dude, I might come. Are you guys starting on Monday, you said? This coming Monday?
I was going to say, you have a GoFundMe. If you could put your
following.
link up too, Jason, because I think that would be awesome if you could join us.
Well, I've told my audience that if we hit the 2K mark by Monday morning, I'll make it down there sometime next week. It's about a 5-hour drive, and I'll have to rent a car and obviously do the hotel thing and blah, blah, blah. But like I said, to my audience, if we do somehow hit $2,000 to the $5,000 before Monday morning, I'll do all that. I'll join these guys for at least a day, maybe two, and we'll live stream all day if we can.
That would be
our audience,
Jason.
if you want to help Jason, please, go do that because we'd like to hang out with him.
Well, now you guys are sweet. That's so nice of you guys. No, it'd be great to have a beer with you guys in person. We talk about all this heavy shit on the air, but that's the thing. We're all real people. Don't we all want to be able to relax and not have to worry about, the Chinese Gestapo tearing us out of our homes? If, that's another thing that's not been featured on this. Think about this. All these people are quarantined who's to say this isn't an opportunity to get some bad people on that social credit score, to go after some political dissidents, to maybe it's none of those things. Maybe they just like somebody's property or their business, and all of a sudden them and their family came down with the Wuhan flu. Is anyone ever going to question it? And all of that is enabled by the suppression of what we have here, which is our First Amendment, okay, and freedom of speech. And then that backed up by the fact if people fuck around too much, we go to the Second Amendment. Guess what? They can't. They're disarmed. They're brainwashed. They don't have freedom of speech. They're accustomed to censorship. They're accustomed to a great leader. I hope that never comes here. And it's so important that we don't allow, again, the extradition of a foreign citizen, the popularization that a group that discloses truth through public documents is a terrorist organization. Yet here we are at 2020, where I just read that and it was signed off by the Make America Great Again folks.
And one thing too, with last messages, because it's something that I watched and it's something that I've showed a couple friends. It's not the easiest thing in the world to watch. And I don't want to think that anyone thinks that we're saying it is or isn't something. And don't believe what the words that it's saying on the screen are necessarily either. Just make your own opinions and judgments. The biggest thing about it too is, and this is a question I posed to my friend last night, how did we find out about Tiananmen Square? And the answer was because there was someone there to report it. And a lot of what is happening in the media right now, whether it's national or international, is easily manipulated unless there's a real actual person there on the ground to report it, because we don't get real information from mainstream sources anymore. It's pretty much entirely propaganda at this point. So don't be afraid to be a journalist. Don't be afraid to pull out your camera and show people what you're seeing in the world, because right now shit's crazy.
100%, man. And I couldn't agree with you more to ignore what's on the screen, because, there's a lot of context missing from these things. But I don't know how much context I need when I see a bunch of people in masks walking through the streets with chains surrounded by law enforcement. I think the context of that visual is enough for me. And again, people should have discernment. I haven't been one of those people that have said, there's a pandemic and it's going to take out the world. The zombie apocalypse is coming. We've heard these things again and again, but this one is the first time we've seen a government or a state suppress so many people and instill fear in a populace, and essentially hammer down with a martial law like I've never seen in my life.
And if you try and speak out about it, if you try and post about Twitter about it, they'll ban you like they did Zero Hedge. They got yanked under harmful speech or something, and then their whole presence was gone in the blink of an eye. And that's in the same week that Elizabeth Warren rolled out her plan to combat online disinformation, that Twitter was banning parody, that the option to have someone mass reported for specifically political misinformation. It was all in that same week, gearing up towards the biggest press freedom trial in freaking history.
And remember, Twitter
broad daylight. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Twitter this past week changed their terms of service. It goes into effect March, but there's a new term for leakers. They're leaktivists, aka terrorists. And now there's a new term for fake news, and it's synthetic media. And they have this new thing where synthetic media is essentially, did they edit it? I don't know. Did I run something at slow-mo 50% for dramatic effect? Is that synthetic media? Like, what are we actually talking about? And
can we all take a moment of silence real quick to think about what George Carlin would have to say about this? Like, just a brief one. Like, Brother George, man, synthetic media, national interest, the fact that imminent threat doesn't mean imminent threat or anything related to a threat whatsoever. It can be something, it's a feeling, Jason. It's a feeling deep down in your soul or your gut or wherever you figure out that this is where you need to bomb brown people. Right there, that place that says, I'm a scared, and I'm gonna do something about it.
I love everything you said right there. You're not wrong. Imminent threat. Imminent threat doesn't mean imminent threat. Does it even mean a threat? I mean, one of the things I've done this week over on the channel is I played a debate from 2007. Presidential debate. It was in July. It was in the run-up to the 2008 election. It was significant for a few reasons, okay? Number one, it was the first ever YouTube debate where people actually sent their questions in via YouTube. And not only did they really start with every single candidate up there, including the all-stars, Joey B., Hillary Clinton, and Barack Obama, all having a real plan to get us out of Iraq, but everybody else up there too. Within a year, 6 months, the only people that were actually, real about it were Dennis Kucinich and Mike Gravel. Mike Gravel tried to run this year. The establishment really wouldn't let him. Dennis Kucinich is one of the few people that's, was anti-war then and is anti-war now. And I'll tell you the truth. Everybody in between, the conversation has just changed so much. And remember, 3 of those people that were up on that stage that made those promises, you can watch it on C-SPAN right now. It's archived. They became the president, they became the vice president, and they became the Secretary of State. And while they were up there fear-mongering and saying that Mitt Romney and the Republicans would lead us into war with Syria and possibly Iran, who ran Operation Timber Sycamore and got us into Syria? Those 3 motherfuckers right there.
100%. I got a video you got to check out. It's slightly unrelated. And right before Gary Webb got assassinated, he went on to the Montel Williams show. And this is something I sent Josh, our tech guru, earlier. But it's like a full 40-some minute Montel Williams episode with him and Mark Levine and Representative Charlie Rangel and just some like complete evangelical douchebag. I can't remember his name. But the fact, Jason, that on daytime television, Gary Webb could come on and say, this is how I accidentally found out that the CIA was running drugs through America and they were doing it to destabilize specifically low-income neighborhoods. And he was able to have this conversation on daytime TV. Can you imagine somebody trying to do that in today's media environment? We are less free now than we were in 1993, 1994, when Montel Williams had daytime TV.
Yeah, no, you're right. I would just today, I got interviewed by Wired magazine, and they're doing a piece on the 15-year anniversary of Loose Change, right? And we were talking about media and how things could go viral then and they couldn't go now. And I said, look, man, back in the day, before even everybody was using the internet, we're talking about 2005, 2006, 2007, when it was the most viral. You had a Google video, but it was an email chain. It was instant messenger. People were going that way. And then on these social media platforms that were around, like the MySpaces of the world, right? Because that was the most popular. There wasn't an aggregate or an algorithm to suppress any information. I go, now everybody's been relegated to these corporate sites like Twitter and Facebook, and there are algorithms to suppress anything like that going viral anymore. I go, so in a lot of ways, it was a lot easier then for us to get information out. Now, on the flip side to that, I said that same tool, YouTube, Google, etc., allow me and you to broadcast this to the entire world in 1080p in real time. I got a decent production value here. You guys have a decent production value there. I can compete with the mainstream media. However, the algorithm literally has its fucking digital boot on my goddamn neck. And it will only allow me to breathe ever so slightly. So I'm trying to breathe, I'm trying to scream, and it's just, we got to use what we got. Dak is out there, and I truly believe if Dak Rouleau, was doing this 14, 15 years ago, he would have been viral 3 months ago.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt. And there'd be 80, 90 more people who are running around doing the exact same thing, because it is an inspirational thing that he's doing. It's something that more and more people should be doing. This isn't something, and they should be doing it to supporters, to campaign staff members, to sitting members of Congress, to bankers, to lawyers, to anybody that they possibly can. What is your stance on Julian Assange? How do you feel about Julian Assange? Should Julian Assange be pardoned? Should Julian Assange be extradited? This is something that we should be doing to every State Department official.
Steve, slow down. Those were really, really complicated sentences. I mean, the people have been pretty done. Could you say them slower? I think there were like 5 words in each of them. I mean, you're fucking asking a lot, Steve. I mean,
you can't expect presidential candidates to know about the biggest trial on press freedom in our generation. If of any of the generations that are alive right now, you can't expect presidential candidates to keep up on that kind of stuff.
So we actually have a really exciting announcement. We just recently launched our Discord, which it's basically like a new version of a forum, essentially, for helping the production value of the vigil, but also helping with in-person organizing. And one of our first groups that we have set up is actually the Free Assange Denver group has converted to being Denver Action for Assange. So we're super excited to start working with them. We got co-sponsored by a lot of organizations and endorsed by a lot of organizations for our DC events. We have Code Pink, we have Women Against Military Madness, we have Veterans for Peace. Popular Resistance is co-sponsoring us, and a couple others. So what we're hoping to do, coming out of the first week of Julian's hearing, but before that second, third, and fourth week towards the end of May, beginning of June, is to set up like college teach-ins and town hall events and things like that. So if you're, and the idea is to connect the vigil here with a physical space there to get around the censorship that you were talking about, to be able to have these conversations with real people and stream us in person to have these conversations and to answer the hard questions that people have, because there is so much propaganda. So if you're someone that would be interested in helping us organize that, really all you need is a laptop, an HDMI cord, an internet connection, and a power supply. And we can help you organize different events if you want to set up teach-ins in your community or town hall events at a local organizing center. So if you're interested, check out our Twitter to get the Discord link and hop in there.
We also have Action for Assange Argentina and Action for Assange North Carolina. So we are expanding our branch, and we look forward to more people doing on-the-ground actions. Jason, I wanted to get your opinion on this. We know, and we spoke about this a little bit on the vigil earlier, but we know that we now have proof that the Sanders campaign does not have a stance on Julian Assange. And to me, this is indicative of a much larger issue, the fact that a U.S. presidential candidate is fearful because of the political consequences that may come from actually speaking up about this case. Do you see this as a systemic problem as well?
Well, I see it as a problem that the only person up there that really seemed to even address it in the proper manner was Tulsi Gabbard. The one thing I will say about Bernie Sanders is that before the mainstream media basically erased Gabbard from the picture, right? Didn't allow her into the New Hampshire debates. You saw Bernie and her kind of getting along, and you kind of hope that Bernie might choose her, if not as his vice presidential candidate, because I'll say it again, I'm going to piss my audience off, but if he announced her as her running mate, I may actually campaign for that guy. I could disagree with 90% of his platform, but I feel like that would be enough. But as I've said before, I've cursed the guy out on here, and it's not because I disagree with a certain policy or Medicare for all. It's because if you're not going to stand up for free speech, if you're not going to stand up for the disclosure of documents that prove that this war is unjust and it's part of this military industrial complex that continually needs to be exposed, how can I even believe that you're really anti-war in the first place? No matter how you say you vote or how you say you feel. Again, if you're not going to stand up for Assange, and you're not even going to say the reality of the situation with the DNC leaks, with quote unquote Russiagate, with the fact that we just had Aaron Rich and Matt Couch in one of those lawsuits involving Assange, request Assange to give a deposition in the lawsuit. Both parties, the people who were suing and the people being sued. You know who said no dice? The judge. The judge doesn't want that. So when the judge doesn't want Julian Assange to talk about those leaks in any courtroom whatsoever, what does that tell you? Even a civil courtroom. That's crazy. So we're in crazy town, and we need someone like Bernie Sanders, if he's going to be the front runner, to step up to the plate and talk about these issues. And until he does, there should be grave concern.
But the media might make fun of him. They might say bad things about him. The exact people that aren't going to vote for him or hold secret meetings to stop him and who are actively working to make sure that the primary is rigged so that this man doesn't get into office, they might not vote for him. Can you imagine?
Let's say this, Steve, I've been hammering this home the past couple of days on my channel because I think it's important. But when we look at, for instance, the Mueller report right here, and the mentions of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and Seth Rich, well, they're few and far between, but they're all in the same spot. Okay? And they're basically trying to say that WikiLeaks is peddling conspiracy theories, even though every document they've ever put is real. They initially said there was no investigation or files on Seth Rich, yet investigative techniques were blacked out in this section heavily. And just this week, last week, what did we find out? We found out not only was there documentation from the FBI on Seth Rich and company, but that documentation was requested by Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. These are all facts. The FBI has been lying the entire time, and there's not a peep about it where? On Fox.
Was that the Judicial Watch report?
That one right there that I just highlighted? No, that was the actual Mueller report. That's the Mueller report. So in the actual Mueller report, when they reference Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, and Seth Rich, it's all in the same section. It's to defame Assange and call him a conspiracy theorist. It's to cover up their investigative techniques of how they found out. It completely coincides with that leaked phone call where Seymour Hersh says that there was an FBI file on him, okay, that's been covered up. We now have more confirmation of that through the Judicial Watch documents you're talking about, the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page emails that are heavily redacted. However, what does Strzok ask for? He asks for the FBI's investigation into Seth Rich. Are you telling me it's imagination land? That it doesn't exist? Is Santa Claus coming? Is he coming with the Russia hack? He's gonna fling it over. The pylon is gonna show us how Poot Poot managed to do the whole thing through Assange and WikiLeaks. Or is it what we've known all along? And it's been in our face. And nobody in the mainstream media, whether you consider them conservative or liberal media, will even touch it. This is 2020, man. The narrative is fully controlled on so many levels that it's up to us to try to take it back.
Or at the very least, make them have to respond in some way to the fact that we are trying to implement this change to the narrative to begin with.
I couldn't agree more. Guys, I've been doing this like all day, so I'm going to wrap it up on my end. I do want everybody to please go once again to actionforassange.com. You can help them out there. You can go to their GoFundMe. I'm going to put that in my live chat. I'm also going to put in the YouTube channel where you can watch the rest of this amazing vigil as I go eat some chili and calm down from another red-faced, upsetting Action for Assange vigil. I get a little emotional. But guys, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to do this. I'm so glad to have you, and I really hope that my audience understands how important you guys are and how they need to support you. And like I said, I just put the link in there. So does anybody want to wrap it up, say goodbye to my audience?
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to Jason's audience for watching us. Again, you guys can catch us every Wednesday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Action for Assange YouTube channel. We will be covering the London full extradition hearing. I will be covering that. And my colleagues and my co-hosts will be holding peaceful demonstrations in DC. So again, do follow us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor, Steve, Andrew, and Christy. And hopefully I will see at least some of you guys in DC next week. Hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. Thanks again. Yeah, so guys, once again.
All right. So I also want to make a shout out to Kevin Zeese of Popular Resistance. They are one of our sponsors, and I know that he may be facing jail time by the end of this week, but we are grateful for all of our sponsors. Popular Resistance is one of them. We're very grateful to have people that are fighting for Julian Assange and free speech and free press alongside us. Now, we do have some articles that we want to touch on, and we'll move forward with the show.
Yeah, real quick, I don't know if we're going to discuss this in detail or not, but Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers are two of the people who were inside the Venezuelan embassy for nearly a month during the literal siege of the Venezuelan embassy by supporters of the fake president Juan Guaido. Max Blumenthal ended up getting arrested with bogus charges over that. Medea Benjamin got arrested with bogus charges over that. I have several videos on my channel, Slow News Day, which you can find here on YouTube by typing in Slow News Day podcast. Several videos. I even have a playlist about the embassy siege. My friend and colleague, Al Suarez, was outside trying to deliver food to the people who are inside the embassy. Flash forward with a ton of stuff to this trial where the US government is going after the embassy protectors. They just found out that the jurors are not allowed to hear, that they were invited there by the Maduro government, that they had permission to be there, that Maduro is still the elected president of Venezuela, that Juan Guaido is a fake president. The jurors aren't allowed to hear any of this. They are being totally screwed. And they have a very, very thin sliver of good luck or good light that they're in. But other than that, they're facing a year in prison and $100,000 in fines for protecting the Venezuelan embassy.
So what's the justification behind not being able to know the facts of the case to be able to make a judgment as a juror?
The prosecution argued for it to be kept out. They said it would be prejudicial.
That's crazy.
Delivering the facts of the matter are prejudicial. Facts are prejudicial, Andrew. They are.
I mean, that's just the world we're living in at this point, where everything's treated as if it's a national security case. Things are just open and shut straight through. There's not even accountability within the prisons itself. There's a situation involving one of my really, really good longtime activist friends. She is a writer for a gentleman in prison. She does like pen pals and has prison sons, essentially. That's something that I'll talk about as that story develops. But just to kind of tease it out until she gives me the go ahead to talk about it. Our prison systems are fucked. Even the public private prisons that aren't part of the national security system. So the very simple fact that they have the ability in a civil court to exclude these kinds of details is absolutely insane.
Right. And we also know, along with earlier in the vigil, a couple months ago, we also talked about how Max Blumenthal was essentially being retaliated against because of his reporting on Venezuela. And he was arrested for a made up assault charge that they did not do anything about for 5 months. So we see the legal system frequently being used to further persecute journalists because their work is inconvenient to the government and to powerful people. We could only expect this to continue to happen if Julian Assange is extradited to the United States. So always remember this in the greater context of things. Sure, this is about Julian Assange and his human rights, which have been violated, and it's his case that we're seeing all of this start to unfold, but realize that the long-term repercussions for his being tried in a U.S. Court is extremely serious. So be thinking of that too as you're planning out these next few weeks. And if you do have time, please join our efforts in DC. And if you don't, be vocal on social media in a respectful way, of course, and also hold protests, personal protests in your hometowns. You'll be surprised at how many people are willing to hear your message.
Yeah, and organize locally too, especially at this time. The more people we have as the free speech community and people that are worried about the future of our nation, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, bring people together, be the catalyst in your community for the positive change that needs to happen locally, but also needs to happen on these much larger scales, like with the issues with our healthcare system and with the issues that Julian's facing and the issues that we're all facing in response to Julian facing these situations. So never forget that there's people immediately and directly suffering that don't have the means and ability to stand up. So if you can be their catalyst for fighting back at this, but can give something back to them that help them have the ability to fight back, that goes a really long way.
So if you are watching this video right now, make sure that you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. If you're new, if you already are subscribed, or you know that you did subscribe previously, just double check and also hit that bell so you get notifications when we go live. Again, if you are new, we go live every Wednesday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Starting February 24th, which is the week of the full extradition hearing, I will be covering the hearing from London. My colleagues will be holding peaceful demonstrations in DC. Again, we will have that streaming on some platform or multiple platforms. We will be more specific as this date approaches. So I know that there is other news we want to touch on, specifically, and this is great news, Julian Assange was awarded the Gary Webb Freedom of the Press Award, the 2020 Freedom of the Press Award. Consortium News posted an article about this, and we'll be putting that up for you guys so we could talk a little bit more about this. But again, every time that Julian is awarded these certain awards, it's very meaningful and it's special because it further proves and shows that this is somebody who is a journalist who has done a very effective job in reporting. Of course, we all know that, and supporters of his know that, but this really helps to kind of convince people who may otherwise be on the fence of, is he a journalist? Is he not a journalist? But before we get into that, if one of my co-hosts want to explain who Gary Webb is and the significance of this particular award.
Oh, yeah. So Gary Webb was a journalist at the San Jose Mercury, and he got a phone call one day, in his own words, that he was like, really sick of answering the phone. Picked it up, and it was a woman telling him that her boyfriend was in prison for selling cocaine, and that he had been basically set up by the U.S. intelligence service. And he was like, damn, yeah, you're crazy. But the more she talked, the more he became convinced enough to go and look into the story. It turns out that the man in question was Freeway Rick Ross. If you are unfamiliar with the story of Freeway Rick, go look into that. He's still alive. He's out of prison. He's got a t-shirt company or something like that. I swear, I'm not even kidding. There's a couple documentaries on Obama flicks. I think he was on Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli, like way early on in that show's existence. At any rate, Gary Webb went down to go visit Rick in prison. And the more that they talked, and the more that Gary Webb was jotting down, the more he became convinced of the fact that the CIA was running cocaine into the United States and getting it into the hands of not just Freeway Rick, but a handful of other dealers in order to essentially destabilize Black and brown neighborhoods and create a mass incarceration system. There's a movie called Kill the Messenger about Gary Webb, because one day he walks outside to get the paper and he's shot twice in the head. Again, as we were talking about earlier, Gary Webb was actually like, he would go around and he would do interviews about this. Let me grab the name of the book real quick. Dark Alliance, the story behind the crack explosion, was the book. 20,000 words on how the CIA was trafficking cocaine into the United States. It actually did result in some Senate hearings. There is still somewhere archival footage of those Senate hearings. They are a trip because you've got the House of Representatives all 100% knowing and having to acknowledge the role that the CIA played in the crack epidemic. And nothing was done about this because by and large, it was only affecting Black and brown communities. It wasn't until crack started to explode and get out of hand in middle class to like, lower middle class levels, and they had to start sending college prospects into rehab, that there was a huge campaign to really eradicate crack. And the way that they did that was to charge you the same as a nugget for a crack, as a crack rock, as they would a fucking helicopter's worth of cocaine. You can heavily thank Bill Clinton and Joe Biden for that.
And a lot of that too, just to to piggyback off of the crack epidemic and everything that they caused, our 13th Amendment allows for legal slavery within the United States as long as it's within our prison systems. And I don't want to be too long on this because I'll kick it back over to Steve. But essentially, what the war on drugs and everything did is allow for more African American men, just African American men, to be in jail now than there ever was working as slaves in the field. And that doesn't count the African American women. That doesn't count any of the Latino or white population or Asian population that is inside of the slavery industrial complex that we have and call a prison system. So I just wanted to make sure that we could put that out there too, that those people were put into slavery specifically designed by a program set up by Nixon and then pushed by the CIA.
100%. And you're right about the 13th Amendment. It's why, it's exactly why mandatory minimums were created. What it is it's the destabilization of the family unit. It's making a mother with children dependent on the state. It's making those kids 100% victims of a school to prison pipeline, where you can see public and private dollars going in to reinforce this system that is institutionally designed to take advantage of the fact that there's a broken family unit. The head of household, in more cases than not, is locked up or a part of that system. I can't fucking remember the number offhand. Maybe one of you guys can look it up. But there is a ridiculous and staggering number of Americans that are either currently or part of, either on probation or on parole, in the criminal justice system. The number of ones that have been and have been able to turn in their number, get off parole, get off probation, way the fuck higher. But it starts going up right around it kicked off with Nixon's war on drugs. It went into freeway gear. Maybe that's a Freeway Rick Ross reference. Maybe
yeah, that was
that's
smart
for you guys to determine.
So
We never know. But yeah, with the 1994 Crime Prevention Act, that's when we went into if it was Spaceballed, it would be ludicrous speed. That's how fast we took the war on drugs. Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And also, too, as far as the prison systems, we know that it's completely broken in the United States. There's also a profit motive to this, but this directly relates to Julian Assange. Specifically, of course, he's not in a U.S. Prison. We hope he's not going to make it into a U.S. prison, but he is in a U.K. prison, being treated pretty poorly. We can only expect his treatment to be even worse when he gets to the United States. So keep that in mind, that all of these other issues that we care deeply about do relate to this case, and that includes our really sick and twisted criminal justice system. But I do want to get back to this specific award and hear from more of you guys, Christy, Andrew. why you think this is so significant. I know when I saw this, it made me really happy to see yet here we have another award. I mean, if you look at all of the awards that Julian has earned, it's quite remarkable, and it's something that we would really like to highlight here on the Vigil, not just maybe some of the negative aspects of this case, but also the good things and the good work that he has done.
Yeah, once again, we have Julian Assange winning these awards for freedom of the press, and he is being held inside Belmarsh prison. He's winning these awards regardless of his ability to be continually publishing. Obviously, he had to step down as editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks late in 2018 it was. And so the fact that these groups are still looking towards Julian Assange and the work he has done and the work that WikiLeaks is continuing to do in his place as he awaits extradition hearing, I think it just speaks mountains of his principles that he built WikiLeaks on, what WikiLeaks has done for the world as far as freedom of information, freedom of press, and continues to do. And I really think things like this really do honor him and show what he's going through now as a political prisoner in the Belmarsh prison in the UK prison system, and how he is not receiving justice, as we've seen through many of these case management hearings, and that he won't be receiving justice in the US either.
Andrew, why don't you read through just a couple really impactful statements that are in that article? Again, we found this in Consortium News has reported about this. I believe it's an article by Joe Lauria. But if there are some statements that you want to read out to our viewers.
Yeah, I'll just take it up from the top and go through the first couple paragraphs. Julian Assange, the imprisoned and maligned publisher of WikiLeaks, has been awarded the 2020 Gary Webb Freedom of the Press Award by the Board of Consortium for Independent Journalists, publishers of Consortium News. Assange is incarcerated in a maximum security prison in London, awaiting a hearing later this month on the extradition request by the United States. He has been charged with 17 counts under the U.S. Espionage Act for possessing and publishing classified material that revealed prima facie evidence of U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. For practicing the highest order of journalism, revealing crimes of the state, Assange faces 175 years in a U.S. prison, a life sentence for the 48-year-old Australian. Assange, whose life has been endangered in harsh prison conditions, has been an international symbol of the threat to press freedom. He is the first journalist to be charged under the Espionage Act for the possession and dissemination of state secrets. Robert Perry, the late founder and editor of Consortium News, was a staunch defender of Assange's rights. In 2010, he wrote, "Although American journalists may understandably want to find some protective cover by pretending that Julian Assange is not like us, in reality, whether we like it or not, we are all Julian Assange."
Yeah, some really powerful statements in there. Again, you can find that full article in Consortium News by Joe Lauria. But another article that was written by another very well-respected journalist, Chris Hedges. This is in Truthdig, and we'll be pulling that up on the screen for you all as well. And then also, before I get into this exactly, or one of my co-hosts kind of outlines the points that are made in this article in Truthdig, somebody mentioned in here if we were to please speak about Jeremy Corbyn's statement to the Prime Minister. We will be talking about that a little bit later. I believe we may be showing that clip.
We're
so
talking
we'll
about that later.
We'll get to that.
Don't you worry.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite interesting. So Truthdig, again, this is an article titled, "What is happening to Assange will happen to the rest of us." This is a common theme that we have alluded to throughout the vigils, that through the persecution of Julian Assange and through his trial, if he is tried in the US, again, we're trying to prevent that. If that does happen, this will impact everybody, not just the journalists, but also just average citizens who have a right to know this information. As I told all of you, I spoke with his US attorney, Barry Pollock, who said this impacts everybody. That is coming from an attorney. So I think we are going to pull this up on the screen for you guys. If one of my co-hosts wants to take a moment to kind of outline some of the points that were made in this article. I know that there's quite a bit of reference to the Spanish case regarding UC Global.
Yeah, Chris Hedges has written a number of great articles on Julian Assange throughout his time in the embassy and as he was arrested last year and going through the UK court system. Yeah, he does talk a lot about the UC Global case and to the depth of, excuse me, what they were doing to spy on Assange. Even talking about taking a DNA test from a diaper from a baby that visited the embassy. And as we know that there were cameras and microphones planted all over the embassy, even in the restrooms. And really kind of goes on to talk about the extradition hearing and upcoming. I'm trying to, hold on, pull this up so I can see it too. Steve, if you would like to jump in, you're more than welcome to. Hold on. For some reason, my web browser's being weird.
Sure. In case you don't remember, UC Global, their CEO, David Morales, is currently under indictment for all of this. Julian testified via video link about what happened to him at the embassy to the Spanish courts. There are emails out. Internal memos out, and there's a chain of evidence that shows Morales either boasting or using the fact that they are working directly for the American friends and the American client, the CIA, that he would take monthly trips to one of Sheldon Adelson's casinos to pass this information on to his U.S. handlers. The simple fact of the matter is David Morales is guilty as sin. UC Global is guilty as sin. These people are going to go to prison in Spain. Now, what effect that has on Julian Assange's extradition hearing ought to be a complete dismissal, because not only did UC Global violate his civil rights and his, I would assume, some human rights there, but every single person who walked into the door there was had all of their information sent to the CIA. That means there's a reason for a two-step trace on their phones. That means there's reason to attach human resources to violate all of everything they've ever done digitally. It is an insane breach of what a quote-unquote security firm is supposed to do. Hedges goes on to discuss the conditions that he's in Belmarsh, that he had not been allowed access to his attorneys, that he had not been allowed access to his mail, that he was not allowed anywhere near a computer, and just kind of drives home the point that were this to go forward, were Julian Assange prosecuted under 17, 18 charges for violation of the Espionage Act and doing journalism, then the precedent that sets for, be it the New York Times, be it some joke outlet like Vox, or be it action for Assange. If anything is written, if publishing government documents becomes a crime, then any news outlet anywhere can be imprisoned for up to 175 years, in this case, for publishing something that embarrasses the government. That is disgusting.
Yeah, studying media law, we often look back on historic cases that some have gone to the Supreme Court, some have not. And we often talk about how if this decision was made in the reverse, our lives would be fundamentally different when it comes to our ability to publish information or access information or anything related to media and having access to to info, how these decisions would drastically change our world. And oftentimes when we're talking about this specific case, I think of this as being one of those cases where it's going to drastically change our world. And hopefully in the future, we will be looking back one day saying, thank God this went the right way. Thank God that everything did not turn out so horribly, and that this case actually was never, brought to trial, because this is going to have serious impacts on the way that we can publish information and on how we can receive information and what that information is. This has to be something that is so tempting to the powerful, to the ruling class. I mean, I think that they have to be viewing this case as an opportunity to just kind of have no worries whatsoever as far as being corrupt and engaging in some really destructive activities, especially war crimes, and facilitating in the deaths of people overseas.
There's one line in this article, Chris Hedges says, journalists can argue that this information, like the war logs, should have remained hidden, but then they can't then call themselves journalists. That line just really stuck out to me, that it's so astonishing to me that we are even having the debate on the things that WikiLeaks has released, as if this information shouldn't be known to the public. It shouldn't be known to people in other countries where their tax dollars are paying for these atrocities, these war crimes, companies that are creating this corruption, whether it's financial or it's environmental. And so I really think that line, when you see people criticize Julian Assange for what he did, when you see people criticize WikiLeaks for what they did, think of that line and think of, is this person actually a journalist? Like, are they self-censoring? Are they helping the government and the state censor more information so that the truth can't get out there?
And to Taylor's point too, and to drive it home a little bit more specifically, if Julian's case is allowed to even go through, not just him being found guilty, but allowed to actually proceed and to be extradited, it fundamentally changes everyone's relationship to government, and fundamentally changes what it means for government to be in our life. Because going forward after that, it literally says what the government says is fact and anything else is not, because all that he's guilty of is telling the public accurate information. So when someone blows the whistle on local corruption, this can almost be cited as a way to attack them, because it wasn't what the official story of what happened was released by City Hall and the police. And this is something that we already see with the way that people are treated in criminal situations. So this just exacerbates a pre-existing issue and just puts it in everyone's face in such a way that they try to propagandize it for the last 10 years to hide it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like Andrew was saying, even if this is brought to court in the US, I'm guessing that the interpretation of the First Amendment, and the fact that it, I guess, does not apply to foreign nationals, again, that's one interpretation, that will then stand. And so other people can be tried who are non-citizens, and then that will empower other governments to be trying to be doing the same thing, and trying journalists who are non-citizens for violating their Espionage Act or their equivalent of their Espionage Act. So it's really important to be thinking of the serious repercussions this has if it even goes to trial. I know that we have some other articles that we would like to touch on if there are some final thoughts about this one. But if we could pull up the next article. Oh yeah, we do want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn. We said we were going to play that video for you guys. So we'll be pulling that up. And okay, so yeah, we'll be pulling that video up for you guys. I'm sure you have seen it. If you have not, it's pretty interesting, and I really love to see a powerful government official really stand up for Julian, and you see the way that the others kind of respond to it in this exchange, and then we'll talk about it.
Chooses to do it because
And,
of this
as we're pulling
lopsided
that
treaty.
video
I'm
up,
glad the Prime Minister at least acknowledges that. This deep disparity with the US is about to be laid bare when the courts decide whether the WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange will be extradited to the US on charges of espionage for exposing war crimes, the murder of civilians and large-scale corruption. Will the Prime Minister agree with the parliamentary report that's going to the Council of Europe that this extradition should be opposed and the rights of journalists and whistleblowers upheld for the good of all of us?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to comment on any individual case, but it is obvious that the rights of journalists and whistleblowers should be upheld, and this government will clearly continue to do that.
So that's 53 seconds of what could have been. That's 53 seconds echoing what he said on election day, but just on election day. That's 53 seconds of Jeremy Corbyn finding the spine that he put in a nice little box in 2017 when he went to go work with the more conservative faction of Labor, when he went and played ball with the Lib Dems, when he stopped talking about what was going to happen to the state of the National Healthcare Service, when he chose not to mention Julian Assange. I applaud him for what he said, but man, it feels like if he doesn't build on this outside of Parliament, like if he doesn't try and build and reach out to what was his base and make this an issue for them, then the opportunity missed is severe. I would like to get you guys' thoughts about this because I have an awful lot to say.
Well, this is, unless I'm missing one, the third left-wing leader in the world to speak out on behalf of Julian Assange. We have Jeremy Corbyn, we have Lula da Silva, and we have President of Mexico. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. So it's literally just a matter of time until other politicians and other people in positions of left-wing influence throughout the world are forced to speak out or to show their hand and say silence is a betrayal. So I really appreciate him doing it. I would have liked to have seen more in the lead up to this. I would have liked to have seen it made an in-your-face campaign issue. And I'd like to see it made an in-your-face campaign issue here in the United States. But unfortunately, none of the candidates on the stage have the political will to do so.
Right. And this kind of reminds me of it being almost too late, something that we all worry about. And I know we all share this belief, but we worry about politicians kind of holding off for political reasons before they make a statement about Julian Assange. I see a parallel here. It may be a stretch, but I do see a parallel that it's too late. Well, it's not too late now, but I'm saying it one time, eventually it could be too late. So that's why it's important to be grateful when they do talk about it, but also remind people that they had this chance, and this chance. And that is why we need to put the pressure on now, because it takes a while for these politicians to kind of catch on. And it also takes them like several journalists to ask them the same question, same uncomfortable question before they're ready to actually address it or feel that they have to.
Yeah, I think obviously we are grateful for Jeremy Corbyn to be speaking up on Julian Assange's behalf. But the timing does seem very interesting. It feels like it makes less of an impact based on the timing. And so that leads me to wonder, why is he speaking up now? Why didn't he speak up before? And like Taylor said, when you have so many opportunities and you refuse to speak up, I hate to say every politician has a calculated move, but I wonder what the calculated move is here for now speaking up, especially if you're not continuously speaking up for Julian Assange at every opportunity. Why are you conveniently doing it now? What's in it for him? I don't know. I have a lot of questions and I don't have a lot of trust in politicians, so I do wonder about the motives behind it.
The answer is John Kiriaku's what he got told by Jesselyn Radick in the courtroom when he was getting prosecuted under the Espionage Act. And that's this isn't about truth or what's right or wrong. This is about mitigating damage. Jeremy Corbyn mitigated the damage he would take by waiting till election day to bring it up, by bringing it up after the fact, by beating Boris Johnson over the head with it now, when it might generate more sympathetic press, maybe, than it did when he was on the campaign trail. But it's certainly a calculation based on self-preservation. Hashtag unintentional rhyme.
Absolutely. And it's something that, even though it's designed to be that way, and it's designed that it can't be put out front as an in-your-face issue, I'm still grateful that he did it. I wish it would have been done a different way. I wish he would have been standing up more vocally from the beginning. But at the end of the day, at least they have a leader over there that'll say Julian Assange's name and at least to some extent put up a fight for him against other leaders that may just want to see him be prosecuted. The thing that I hope, though, is that this doesn't polarize the issue over in the UK. Like, I don't want it to be like, oh, Julian's just this left-wing thing. Did you hear Corbyn and what he said? And then have Boris be able to be like, well, you know, we're the better ones type shit just because of the propaganda.
Yeah, and also too, I want to make that's a really good point, because again, we are really clear to say that there is no political ideology attached to freeing Julian Assange and supporting him and supporting free speech and supporting free press and the rights of whistleblowers. But again, you can disagree, or you can support a candidate and you could be very critical of them as well. Like, it's okay, and you could still support Bernie Sanders, for example, but still really not like the fact that he will not talk about this issue and that his campaign does not have a stance on this issue. And you could take that frustration and you could use it for good, and you can respectfully and politely push him to make a statement about this issue, because remember, he listens to his base, and he also gets, where does he get his money from? He gets his money from his supporters, not corporations. It's a unique opportunity, guys. So if you support Bernie Sanders, use this frustration and don't let it go, and politely and respectfully educate him and also those who are surrogates of his to talk about this. If you put enough pressure on him, if he's asked this question enough times, if his surrogates are asked this enough times, they will feel compelled to respond.
Yeah, and big shout out. I don't know if we can actually play the video because I don't think we've played it yet. But big shout out to Primo Nutmeg for dropping that question on a Bernie Sanders staffer. That's we'll
find out. And if we can't play it, worst case scenario is we ask him for permission after the fact to have played it on our video, and the copyright claim goes away. But the worst thing that can happen is that the show gets demonetized.
And also, too, I want to.
And our shows aren't monetized in the first place. We do super chats, but we don't do like ad monetization.
Yeah.
I also want to say or give a big shout out and thank you to the Convo Couch. Pasta confronted Pete Buttigieg, or he tried to, and asked him persistently, do you support Julian Assange? Will you pardon him? Something to that effect. But he was very persistent, and he got in an altercation with Pete Buttigieg's staff. And honestly, his staff was totally in the wrong. If you look at this video, you'll see that. I believe that they did like get physical with him. And one thing to remember, guys, is that how a candidate staff treats people, especially supporters of other candidates, is really a reflection of that candidate. That's a reflection on Pete Buttigieg. So a big shout out to him for being brave and for holding Pete to account on this issue, even though, of course, he didn't answer the question, and they tried to protect him from answering or from having to answer this question. It was quite stunning. If you have not seen that video, you could find it on their Twitter account, the Convo Couch, and I know Pasta put this out on his Twitter as well.
And more to that point too, Jordan Sheridan had a freelance cameraman who got his credentials yanked off of him and told that they didn't belong there. He was a black dude, and I don't know if that 100% played into it, but I know for a fact that there wasn't a white freelance cameraman that got his credentials yanked off and told he didn't belong there. And then Jordan got told that they had to move on. They were harassing people in line outside. According to Jordan and status quo, they weren't. They have the whole thing on tape. But that's the second attack of a journalist or member of a journalistic outlet that was attacked by Pete Buttigieg's campaign within the same 24-hour period. You're muted, Andrew.
If anyone's in a state, sorry, where these candidates are coming, like I'm in Ohio, they're going to be all over the place here. Be the heckler. Be the person that goes out and foments discord and creates dissent and voices heavy opinions when these candidates come out. Like, huge credit to Craig and to Craig Pasta for going out there to do this. Be that person, whether you videotape it or not. Walk out and just be in an event and yell, "Do you support Julian Assange?" Do it for whatever issues you care about. Do it about the fact that he's a CIA puppet. Do it about the fact that the elections are getting rigged. Do it about information that we learned in 2016 from the DNC and Podesta emails about how they rig elections and launder money. So be that person. Be the one out there yelling at these people, because there's not many of us right now. But as we do this, you'll be surprised at the amount of people that will stand up and start yelling behind you. And even getting a group of friends. Like, if you have some friends that are bored one day and say, "Hey, there's a Pete Buttigieg rally an hour and a half away," take all four of you, go out there and start being the dissidents that are fighting back against the system in a nonviolent, peaceful, and issue-focused way.
I went up to Sonoma State University on Monday to go hear Nozomi Haise give a lecture, and it was incredible. I've got some photos and video of that I'm going to get over to Josh and get clipped out a little bit. Maybe we can release it independently, or we can go back to it a little bit next week. But during the question and answer period, she kind of let me participate and answer questions too. And one of them was just that, like, what can we do? And I said, well, if there's not a protest in your town, be the protest in your town. And that actually raised some applause. It's on my phone and I have to get it. Oh no, I did. I emailed it to Josh. It just has to get clipped out. And then there's some stills of her presentation. One of which was what the mainstream media does, and the title of it was Stenographer to Power. So Nozomi, apparently a fan of the Jimmy Dore show. But yeah, it was excellent. If you ever get a chance to hear Nozomi speak, go and do that. She lit the room up. There was a Karen there. Oh my God, there was a Karen there. Like, she condescended a lot to Nozomi, and was really pushing her to kind of like, well, if you're so smart, then why isn't he free yet? Why isn't there a global movement yet? Why this? Why that? To the point to where
wait, they had somebody in there who was against.
It was so. Check this out, dude. Check this out. Claimed to be a supporter, 100%. Okay. One of the students goes, you're taking up a lot of space, and you're not even a student here. This is kind of for us. You're gonna let us participate at all? She snaps on this chick, and then a dude in the front row, or second to front row, was like, "Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and talk over you now," and started to dress her down for her privilege. And she said, "I know more about this than anyone in the room," with Nozomi Haise standing right there. who's researched it for 10 years, who's written books about it, who is on a lecture tour. This Karen was not, by the way, on a lecture tour. She was in the audience. The dude talks over and shuts her down for a moment, but she still kept talking. Like, she came back. Nozomi finally had to shut her down. This is a very small woman, you know, like, and she had to shut her down. It was, and she did finally shut the hell up and keep her seat and, you know, sit with her hands politely folded on her lap. But she was nearly purple from the rage that she was holding in. It was incredibly interesting.
Yeah. See, when I was in DC for the event, there wasn't any of that. It was overwhelming support. On that note, though, there is an event being held at, I don't know what it stands for. I don't want to mess it up. It's CUNY School of Law in New York City this Saturday at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. It has an awesome panel. I'm so excited to be there. I'm so excited to cover it. Max Blumenthal will be one of the panelists. Renata Avila will be one of the panelists. And then I believe that Anya Parampil will be moderating. And then there's some other people providing like a video statement. So I'm really, really excited to be there to cover that. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm trying to land some interviews after this event. So that will be really exciting if I could speak to some more people who are really fighting for this movement as well. So again, do attend that if you can. Come say hi. Courage Foundation is wonderful that they've been hosting these events. And again, that is in New York City. And I've been tweeting about it quite a bit and talking about it because I'm really looking forward to it. The information, I'm very invested in this case, and I research it quite a bit, of course, like all of us do, but going there, I'm learning stuff that I haven't even thought of before. I'm hearing a different perspective because these are legal experts who are able to speak about this in a way that we're not always exposed to. So do go if you can. Now, that is all that we have for you this evening. Before we do close out and go around, we want to thank our donors, and then we also do want to reiterate some of the events that are going to be held around the world. So Christy, I'll hand it over to you, and then we will just go around. And again, thank you guys every week for watching this with us. As we head into this extradition hearing, you know, the stakes are pretty high. A week tomorrow, I'll be going to London all by myself to cover this. But I will be in communication with my 3 co-hosts back here. I know they're going to do a great job. I know we're going to really do this justice. This is extremely serious. And we're really dedicated to putting so much hard work into this case and into fighting for these freedoms dearly. All right, so Christy, I'll let you take over with the important dates looking ahead.
Yeah, so we have dates ranging from beginning February 22nd with the March in London, where Roger Waters is going to be at, all through that weekend. A lot of events are happening across the world on February 24th, which is the beginning of the extradition hearing, Monday morning in London. And there will be events, of course, all that week in DC. There are also events pretty much across that week all over the world. Follow Unity for J, Candles for Assange to keep track of those events. And of course, if there is an event near you, you are at any time, it doesn't even have to be during the extradition hearing, can always have a free Julian Assange event, free Chelsea Manning. And we encourage everybody to get involved no matter where you're located at.
Yes.
So
oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to go ahead and sign off while I had the floor. My name is Christy Doff. You can follow me at Christy Doff on Twitter. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Share the stream. We're here Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern time. I'm also a contributor to D. Pierce SSC on YouTube, so please go and subscribe to his channel. And like Dak announced, we will be beginning the overwritten report on his channel at Dak Rouleau on YouTube here shortly in the next week.
Yeah, very exciting, guys. Do make sure you check that out. We'll be promoting it on the vigils, and I'm sure Christy will be tweeting about this. That'll be a really exciting show, so we look forward to that. If you don't know who I am, my name is Taylor Hudak, and you can follow me on Twitter @_Taylor Hudak. I will be covering this full extradition hearing in London. I leave a week from tomorrow. I will be working with other journalists in the UK and also attending some other events as well. I will have much more specific information to give to you guys next Wednesday as far as where that content is going to be published. We're not 100% sure of where it's going to be, but we believe it will be on multiple platforms. But again, expect detailed information next Wednesday. Thank you, everybody who has donated to help us make this happen. And thank you all for tuning in with us every Wednesday evening at 10 p.m. And I'm grateful for my co-host. Thank you, guys. And thank you to Josh, who is our tech guy. He works so hard, you guys. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that none of you get to really see. And we will be showing our appreciation and thanks formally in these coming weeks as we start to report on this, this hearing that begins February 24th. So again, thank you all.
You can find me on Twitter. My name is Andrew Smith. You can find me at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. But I want to give a shout out to whoever in the intelligence community is tasked with watching our vigils, whether it's CIA, NSA, MI6, what have you. All it takes is one act of courage to be a whistleblower. All it takes is one act of courage to have the world stand up behind you and say thank you for revealing the truth. If you're someone inside of the intelligence community that's getting paid right now to watch this vigil, I'd say congratulations, because you're probably one of the most well-informed members of the intelligence community at this point on this issue. But let the world know, stand up and reveal these same things, because without someone inside acting, for as much crap as we talk about the intelligence community, all you have to do is the right thing one time to make up for all of those other things that you were just institutionalized into doing to get a paycheck. So I just want to thank you for watching. And if you can, get some other of your spook friends together to watch it and start leaking out information together. Yeah.
My name is Steve Poikin, and I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on the YouTubes at Slow News Day Podcast. Please subscribe to that show. YouTube censors and keeps me struggling, as it were. For about every 15 to 20 subscribers I see roll in, I get to keep one or two of them. So tell your friends and overwhelm them with numbers. I do not use mainstream media as the baseline material for my content unless I can absolutely have no choice. If I have the option, I interview the journalists who are creating the work independently that I do cite on my show. I would like to take Andrew's notion to whistleblowers one step further. If you are an artist, I am looking for a specific design. This is what I want. I want a cartoon whistle, and I want the words, "If you are a member of the national security state," and I want a little tag hanging off the whistle that says "Blow me." So if you are artistically inclined, please help a brother out. Thank you so much to everyone who donated to the GoFundMe. You guys are absolutely incredible, and we are 100% humbled and blown away and ecstatic and a little bit freaked out. You guys are awesome. We love you. To you guys in the chat, you guys are equally awesome. We love you too. Lots of thanks to Dak Rouleau, to Jason Burmis, to Josh, our tech guru. Big thanks to Jason Carney and People of the 99% for streaming this on Facebook. If I forgot anyone, I am sorry. My co-host fucking rock, and I'm Steve Boykin, and good luck to us all.